On June 29, 2026, Emmanuel Sakyi was convicted by a unanimous jury at Aylesbury Crown Court and sentenced in his absence to 15 years in prison for causing death by dangerous driving. He was also handed an 18-year driving ban. But as the judge read out the sentence, the wooden dock where the defendant was supposed to stand remained completely empty. There was no handcuffs clicking, no guards stepping forward, and no reaction from the man whose choices had torn a family apart. Recognizing that the walls were closing in, and knowing the sheer weight of the evidence stacked against him, Emmanuel Sakyi had made a final, desperate choice. He had skipped his bail, cut ties, and vanished into thin air before the trial could even begin. He chose to run, turning himself into a fugitive rather than looking a jury in the eye and facing the consequences of a night that will forever haunt the town of Milton, Keynes. To understand how a father ends up running from a 15-year prison sentence, we have to look closely at the trail of devastation left behind on the roads and the culture of total negligence that led up to a cold winter night. The details that emerged during the trial at Aylesbury Crown Court painted a picture of absolute, unforgivable irresponsibility, a series of decisions where safety, law, and basic parental instinct were completely cast aside. The conviction itself was the culmination of a years-long investigation that began on a dark, freezing Sunday night back in December 2022. It was a time of year when the roads were icy, visibility was poor, and the holiday season was just beginning. People were travelling home to their families, navigating the dark stretches of tarmac that connect the bustling grid system of Milton Keynes. On that particular evening, the quiet rhythm of the night was shattered on a stretch of road running directly between two prominent landmarks, the Bond Avenue roundabout and the Fenny Lock roundabout. This is an area known to locals as a busy thoroughfare, a place where drivers expect routine navigation. But routine was shattered the moment Emmanuel Sakyi got behind the wheel of his Peugeot 508. Earlier that evening, Sakyi had been drinking. He didn't just have a single drink with dinner. He had consumed enough alcohol to completely compromise his judgment, his reaction times, and his basic cognitive functions. When forensic toxicologists later analyzed the timeline, the data revealed a staggering truth. Sakyi was driving while more than 2.5 times over the legal drink-drive limit. Driving a vehicle under the influence of alcohol changes everything. It turns a standard piece of machinery into a weapon. At 2.5 times the limit, a driver's peripheral vision narrows. Their ability to judge distance disappears, and their capacity to recognize danger is severely delayed. But for Emmanuel Sakyi, the danger wasn't something he was trying to avoid. It was something he was actively creating. As he pressed down on the accelerator of his Peugeot, navigating the dark corridors between the roundabouts, his vehicle began to drift. It crossed over the solid white lines, leaving the safety of the correct lane, and entered the path of oncoming traffic. He was now driving completely on the wrong side of the road, blinding anyone heading toward him, creating a high-speed game of chicken where the other drivers had no idea a heavily intoxicated vehicle was hurtling directly at them. The head-on collision that followed was violent, sudden, and absolute. There was no time for braking, no time for evasive maneuvers. The sickening crunch of metal on metal echoed across the Fenny Lock stretch as the Peugeot smashed into an oncoming vehicle. The force of the impact crumpled the front end of the cars, shattering glass across the dark asphalt, deploying airbags and sending a shockwave through the cabins. In any head-on collision at speed, the human body is subjected to massive violent G-forces. Seatbelts lock, plastic trim shatters, and the sudden deceleration causes horrific internal trauma. But as the dust settled and the smoke from the deployed airbags began to clear, the most devastating, heartbreaking detail of this entire tragedy lay trapped inside Sakyi's own car. This wasn't just a case of a drunk driver risking his own life or the lives of strangers. Sakyi had brought his family with him. Sitting in the front passenger seat was his partner, and nestled in that front seat was their 7-month-old daughter, a beautiful baby girl named Emmanuela. In the eyes of the law, and in the eyes of basic human safety, a 7-month-old infant is incredibly fragile. Their neck muscles aren't fully developed, their bones are soft, and they require the absolute highest level of protection available. By law, a child of that age must be secured in a rear-facing, specially designed child safety seat, anchored securely to the vehicle's chassis to absorb the impact of a crash. But on this night, there was no car seat, there was no harness, there was no protection whatsoever. Instead, tiny Emmanuela was being held loosely on her mother's lap in the front passenger seat, directly in the line of fire. When the Peugeot struck the oncoming car head-on, there was nothing to hold the infant in place. The human body cannot hold onto a child during a high-speed crash. The physics of the impact make it completely impossible. The force tore the baby from her mother's arms, subjecting her tiny, fragile body to catastrophic internal injuries. Within minutes, the flashing blue lights of the emergency services began to illuminate the wreckage between the roundabouts. Paramedics, firefighters and police officers arrived at a scene of total chaos. They found a mangled Peugeot, a shattered family and an infant girl fighting for her life. First responders worked desperately under the freezing night sky, treating the baby at the roadside before rushing her under emergency escort to the hospital. Doctors and medical staff took over, utilizing every piece of life-saving equipment available, fighting against the clock to reverse the trauma inflicted by the crash. But the damage was simply too severe. Just a few hours after the collision, little Emmanuela passed away from her injuries, her short life cut tragically short before it had even truly begun. The loss of a child is a pain that leaves a permanent scar on a community. But as the police investigation began at the crash site, grief quickly turned into profound anger. In the immediate chaotic aftermath of the collision, while his partner was screaming and his 7-month-old daughter was taking her final laboured breaths in the wreckage, Emmanuel Sakyi had to make a choice. A true parent, a responsible human being, stays. They help, they comfort, they face the medical staff, and they try to save their family. But Sakyi chose a different path. Utilizing the darkness of the Milton Keynes night and the confusion of the unfolding emergency, he slipped out of the driver's seat, turned his back on his dying daughter, and made the cowardly choice to flee the scene on foot. He ran into the shadows, leaving his family behind in the twisted metal, attempting to distance himself from the crime he had just committed. He thought the darkness would shield him, that the chaos would buy him enough time to escape the consequences of his actions. But Thames Valley Police acted with immense speed. While paramedics focused on the medical emergency, officers began flooding the surrounding area, tracing potential escape routes and heading directly to known addresses. It didn't take long. Shortly after the crash, officers spotted Sakyi lurking near his home address. He was arrested on the spot, smelling of alcohol, shivering in the winter air, and brought into custody. For 3 years, the legal system ground forward. Investigations of this magnitude require meticulous work: forensic reconstruction of the crash site, detailed analysis of the vehicle's mechanics, toxicological reports, and medical testimonies. Throughout this entire period, the memory of Emmanuela hung over the proceedings. The community waited for justice, wanting to see the man responsible held accountable in a court of law. That day finally arrived in June 2026 at Aylesbury Crown Court. The prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece, showing the jury the atmospheric data from that night, the alcohol levels, the complete lack of a child safety seat, and the damning footage of the aftermath. The jury didn't need long to deliberate. The evidence of dangerous driving and utter disregard for human life was overwhelming. They returned a unanimous guilty verdict. The judge, recognizing the severity of the offence and the unimaginable cowardice of fleeing a dying child, handed down a heavy 15-year prison sentence alongside an 18-year driving ban meant to keep Sakyi off the roads for nearly 2 decades. It was a sentence designed to send a powerful message about drunk driving and parental responsibility. But as the sentence was read into the official record, the second agonizing blow to the pursuit of justice was realized. Emmanuel Sakyi was gone. He had abused the bail system, cut off his monitoring, and broken his legal promise to appear. He had chosen to run for a second time. Today, the 15-year prison sentence remains completely unserved, existing only as a piece of paper in a court file, while the man himself walks free somewhere in the shadows. Thames Valley Police have been forced to launch a massive high-stakes manhunt that spans across counties, distributing his photograph to the media, checking known associates, and monitoring transport hubs. Authorities have been explicit in their warnings to the public. Emmanuel Sakyi is a convicted criminal on the run, a man who abandoned his own flesh and blood in her final moments, and he should not be approached under any circumstances. If anyone sees him or has any information regarding his whereabouts, they are urged to dial 9999 immediately. The hunt continues day and night, with investigators tracing every tip, every sighting and every digital footprint left behind. A grandmother, a mother, and an entire community are left in a state of suspended animation, unable to fully grieve or close this horrific chapter while the perpetrator remains at large. The story of Emmanuel Sakyi is a stark, chilling reminder of how a sequence of selfish choices, from a drink at a bar, to a refusal to use a car seat, to a sprint into the dark, can ripple outward, destroying an innocent life and leaving a trail of broken hearts, waiting for a justice that is still desperately trying to catch up.